Coming up, with the Miami Heat on tap for the Brooklyn Nets, we go ahead and let the fans know why Mikal Bridges is going to be just fine. In addition, some send-downs and call-ups give fresh legs, while the injury report suggests we will need to fill in some major minutes for key players. We dive in, coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets. Every single day over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you for making us your first listen. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. I'll let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And where we get started, Doug, in addition to alleviating maybe some of the concerns around the early play of one Mikal Bridges, is updating the injury report, which actually could be concerning for Brooklyn.
Wouldn't be a new season without a healthy, sarcastic tone here. Healthy injury report, pun intended, for the Nets coming into now game 4. Look, injuries happen. We know this. When you have your own team, it can feel like injuries hit your team worse than other teams because you are hyper-focused on your team. And it does feel like injuries have played a pretty major role in the Nets, the Nets fate over the last few years. But we get a pretty lengthy injury report coming in to this fourth game of the season. We already knew Cam Johnson was going to be out because he had the soft tissue stuff with the left calf strain. We knew that Claxton was at least one more game with a left ankle sprain. So we knew those guys were already down for the count. Then you get last game where Spencer Dinwiddie does not come out to play the second half. And a really strange one because it didn't actually look like he got hurt while he was playing. He's been listed doubtful with the left ankle sprain. And Dennis Smith Jr. listed doubtful with a left hip contusion. So Nets already down 4 guys here in the fourth game of the season that, going into the year, not all in the same level, but all felt pretty critical to the Nets' success this season. And Brooklyn is going to be seemingly without all 4 of them going into Miami. And it's just going to mean likely even more concentration of minutes around the guys that we know are playing well, but it's just a brutal beat to start the season like this. Like the Nets need all hands on deck and they just haven't had it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously talk about starters, right? And whether or not we think that ultimately the Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton pairing wasn't going to work out. Well, we only got the one sample. We didn't get more sample on these guys. And then you throw in a guy like Cameron Johnson. We touched on this in the post game coming out of that Hornets win, though. It is funny, although when you add in Spencer Dinwiddie and take another key contributor here, it's crazy to think that you don't feel, at least in the short term, if these got a little bit longer in terms of timelines, you might start to raise some red flags. But right now you go, well, maybe it's all right. Like, surprisingly, this offense has looked good enough. And then even in in the Hornets game, we saw when Spencer Dinwiddie didn't come back, the offense still functioned, right? Yeah. Dorian Finney-Smith stepped up. Other players have stepped up. Lonnie Walker stepped up. And we mentioned this, but the depth of this team, I think we looked at this as saying, well, that's why this team will be able to compete with some other rosters that have high-level superstar talents because we'll be deeper in the rotations. It actually turns out being deeper in the rotations matters in the first 3, 4, 5 games of this season where you're going to need some other legs to come in here. And they certainly have experience, which I think is the biggest part of this.
Yeah, that definitely helps, right? And they're already getting, I think the thing that's also helping with these injury things and the reason we don't feel, in the past, think about this in the past, like the Nets, one of the reasons it felt snake bit for a long time is because the Nets, and this is the way you want to do it if you want to win championships, but the Nets were very top heavy with their talent, right? There was they had this upper tier of talent, KD, Kyrie, James Harden. When you have that, you can contend for championships. But when you have that concentration of talent at the top, you feel it a lot more when one of those guys goes down, right? Like one of those guys gets injured, and all of a sudden you can really, really feel it because like making up for Kevin Durant is literally impossible in modern basketball, right? Like making up for Kyrie Irving is really, really, really difficult. James Harden, really, really difficult. Close to impossible, really, just how good these guys are. The Nets aren't built like that this year. So it doesn't feel as dramatic when these guys are missing because we knew that they had built out just a sort of a deeper roster. And already we're seeing that I think, at least for where I'm concerned, the guys that they have are outplaying some of the expectations even I had going into this year around like how good they can be. So I still think it does reach a critical mass. This is pushing toward critical mass in terms of
one more. And by the way, the tone changes very quickly. One more injury.
I think it's kind of here. Here. I know people want to drag Dinwiddie a little bit. Like they've won every minute that he's easily a positive net rating guy since he came to the Nets. Like that's a bad loss for them. He's a really pretty critical guy. We like what they were getting out of Dennis Smith Jr., especially if he's going to be hounding, the Tyler Heroes of the world, right? Like for Miami. Obviously Claxton for whatever the pairing with him and Simmons, like they need Claxton. Cameron Johnson, that guy fits with every team. And he's your key off. Like they're reaching a point now where the injury bug does feel like they really can't lose anything else. And even this might be too many.
Yeah, and we're going to, on the back end of this episode, talk about some of the send-downs and call-ups from the G League, the two players, Armani Brooks, and also second-round rookie Jalen Wilson being brought into the fold. Could that mean anything in the short term if they try to get some additional bodies in here? But before we do that, we're going to look at Mikal Bridges. I personally have discussed the prospect of needing to manage Cam Thomas and Mikal Bridges and Ben Simmons and creating quality depth across the rotations. That goes out the window with all these injuries. And also what goes out the window is being concerned about potentially the slow start from Mikal. We'll go ahead and knock that off your mind in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. No better time to get in on the NFL and NBA season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers over at FanDuel, $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. It's $150 just if your team wins on that money line. You got to love to hear that. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, no better time to get in the action. You get the money lines, obviously. No spread early for this when we're recording for the Brooklyn Nets game. I'm going to guess that, they're obviously going to be underdogs here going into this one, but that's all right. Spreads, player props, over, unders, and more. If you want a little one, it's not a money line bet, but that's okay. Our friends at FanDuel have gotten with the program when it comes to most improved player. Cam Thomas plus 1,400, fourth overall in odds, overtaken good friend Mikal Bridges in that thing. We're going to catch Tyrese Maxey. We're coming for you, pal. Cam Thomas, they're still sleeping on him at plus 1,400. All of that and more over at FanDuel. So easy to use. You visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can kick off the NFL season. You're going to get into the NBA season as well. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL.
All right, so as we continue this episode of the Locked On Nets podcast, reminding you that if you're enjoying the content on YouTube, seeing our beautiful faces, and also, of course, enjoying the podcast as well, another layer for your friends, get over to joinsubtext.com/lockedonnets, where you can become a Locked On Nets insider, game day tips and notes, matchups. We just had a great conversation about the new look court for the in-season tournament. It's all there for you over on joinsubtext.com/lockedonnets. Doug, before we get into Mikal Bridges, go ahead, because we didn't talk about this on the podcast. What a mess. What a mess this in-season tournament layout is for these courts.
As has been mentioned, that we're going to get to Mikal here in a second, but I just got to say this about the court. I have no color palette. Like, I don't know anything. We play these color games with the kids. I have with my kids. I'm so it's embarrassed. My kids are embarrassed at how bad I am at these games because I can't tell different colors apart. I'm not colorblind, but it feels dangerously close. These courts, I actually sent you the picture. I was like, hey man, send something out in subtext about these courts. Cause like Adam's a really good artist if you don't know this. And so I was like, you got a good visual eye. Like you can draw, like Adam's an excellent illustrator. And Adam was like, oh my God, I think he described the definition of mid. It was like just this gray, disgusting, two-toned mess. So anyway, this is another hat tip. We don't get into it, but there's a hat tip for subtext. If you want to get in on complaining about the Nets mid-season tournament or in-season tournament thing, go over to join us on subtext, and Adam will resend the text because it's Adam digs into it pretty hard. It's a mess.
Absolute mess. That being the case, Mikal Bridges. So one of the things that I talked about going back a couple episodes was just about finding these right combinations. And I said there to close out the last segment, once these injuries start coming up, it doesn't matter. You have to play your best players. They're going to carry the day here. And some of the other pushback that I got from some fans was also that at some point, these guys, Cam Thomas and Mikal Bridges, are going to have to figure out how to play together. And that's true. Like these guys are going to need to share the court at some point. It was more about how do you manage winning games while also sorting out some of these details. But the interesting thing to me was when I went and looked at Mikal's numbers now this year, like he's shooting almost 64 true shooting percentage on the season. it's been a very weird first few games for him where the 3-point shooting hasn't been there yet, just 33%. Okay, fine. He had those like oddly sloppy ball handling issues against the Hornets where it was like he couldn't keep the thing on his hands. So they've been like clunky games for him. And the contrast with Cam Thomas playing such excellent basketball, maybe that throws you off a little bit. But Mikal actually is right where you want him to be from a number standpoint. I think it's just about dialing it up in certain moments of the games here.
Yeah, like again, it hasn't started off perfectly. 33% from three. You don't love to see it, but he's like near perfect at the line, so that's good, right? Yep. Like 93%. He's only missed one free throw. You'd like to see him probably getting to the line a little bit more, because only 3 times each in each of the last 2 games got there. In the first game, but 9 times. He's got to get there a little bit more with the way the Nets are going to play, especially now without Dinwiddie. Like he and Thomas and Cam does no problem with this really. Like they have to get to the line as much as possible because the offense at this point is really just going to be DHO, maybe like a little pistol action with like some pin downs and trying to get them into like sort of one-on-one matchups against situations they can take advantage of, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's just going to be the offense, and get out and transition and run and do the other things that they're going to be able to do. They, drive and kick a little bit, get to the basket, start the ball moving around so you can find a Dorian Finney-Smith wide open 3, Royce O'Neal wide open 3. Like that's kind of got to be the offense here. Now the good news is we've seen Bridges be able to carry that version in decent stretches last year. It hasn't totally come around right now, but I think it's probably going to start to. Him getting into the mid-range a little bit after getting past the first defender. If you got it like drop coverage, he can attack that. So I think that like we're going to probably see almost like exclusive usage between him and Cam, probably at least for this game. That's probably most of their option. The good news is that 1, I think Bridges, I'm really not worried about the efficiency piece for him, but 2, like the numbers with those 2 and Simmons bear out that like that is a winning trio, right? Like that trio can actually get the job done. I can get into some of the numbers, but would you agree with that? Like, I don't think aesthetically it really works because I think they're such one-on-one kind of players, but they might just be so good at what they do each individually that it actually ends up working for winning basketball, even though like there's no assist to be had and there's nothing like that's actually going on.
Yeah, and I think it's the funny part about when you give out a small sample size, basically before the last game alone, you give out the sample size of a little north of 130 minutes. Mikal Bridges and Cam Thomas were having a hard time in terms of net rating. But what you couldn't factor in there, and we only got some sample of last season, was because Cam Thomas wasn't playing enough down the stretch, was Ben Simmons, Cam Thomas, and Mikal Bridges. And this really goes back to Ben Simmons. And we've said this about so many players. I think Spencer Dinwiddie has been another great example of this. It's just that Ben Simmons is an unlocker. He unlocks guys in a way that sometimes, as you just mentioned, visually, it doesn't always look great when they're sharing the court together. But as long as Simmons on a possession-to-possession basis can find one or the other and get them into good spots, then the success comes there. So I think, this is a happy to have been wrong about is there going to be enough ability for both these guys to thrive together and not be ball dominant for Cam Thomas? Because unlike if you want to put Lonnie Walker out there and say, hey, be ready to shoot, or Royce O'Neal, be ready to take your shot if you're in the corner. Well, you can't have Mikal Bridges doing that when Cam Thomas is on the ball. And I've been pleasantly surprised how they've been able to avoid that. Real quick, I wanted to ask you, last year, Mikal Bridges, 28.8 was his usage. Do you know what his usage is this season?
I can look it up I can look it up in a second.
You don't need to. It's 27.4. 27.4 through these first 3 games. Like, I've been also surprised at how high his usage actually is this year. Like, the eye test is tricking me a little bit with what feels like a lot of Cam Thomas, but the absence of other things is what's driving that as well.
Well,
right?
What screws that up, I will say what screws that up probably a little bit is I'm pretty sure turnovers factor into usage, because I think usage just goes down to like end of possession. Like he's
been using it and losing
I think I'll double check that, but I'm pretty sure that it's like end of possession. So it's like you finish the possession, but your usage, that can be turnovers, right? Because you had the ball at the end of this possession. There are different calculations of usage also. Either way, I think he's still probably getting enough in the shots. And I think that's probably a little lower than, well, that's probably actually where it ends up needing to be. By the way, this season, just with the Mikal Bridges, Ben Simmons, Cam Thomas, it's only 57 minutes, but 122.5 offensive rating. Like, solid. That's really good.
I'm going to take
right. It. And when you say Ben Simmons is an unlocker, the dream was Simmons when he came over. Well, what helps these two guys is both of these guys, both Mikal Bridges, at least this version of him, and Cam Thomas, like for them to really be the best version of themselves, they actually have to be shooting. Yes. And it's hard because it's like, hey, it's hard to coexist when each of them need to be shooting and they really both can't be shooting. But if they can help the other one like get into the best matchups and like they can still both make sure they're just each taking efficient shots that can work. And then Simmons obviously doesn't really want to shoot, but can also maybe find guys in good situations. Like that actually is okay to like Simmons can live with high usage guys because he doesn't want to shoot himself. And I think what we saw too is, and I can't remember if we said this in the YouTube live piece or if we said it I think it was in the YouTube live. We were talking about like why the Simmons piece without Claxton works is because when he,
Yes.
and I apologize if I'm repeating this on the pod feed, but I actually don't think I am. The reason it unlocks it without Claxton there is that when he's running like high screen DHO stuff, the opposing big actually doesn't know where to be, and the opposing big has to come all the way up at sort of the level. And at that point, this is why we're seeing more open lanes for Nets develop, like for them to dribble downhill, like with Bridges, with Cam Thomas, with Lonnie Walker, because the big has to come up to meet Simmons, even if they know Simmons is going to shoot threes. You can't hang back and just kind of and hedge on Claxton. And all of a sudden they're look, just think back to the last game of the Hornets. How much space did it seem like was just existed on the court? Didn't it seem like so much more space existed, especially in the paint? It's not an accident. Like this is what's happening when these three guys are playing together.
And it's funny too, and I agree with you on that because there's a couple of guys with some real length for the Hornets, and it just never felt like, oh boy, it's getting congested. Right. No, it felt like, hey, room to operate, whether it was backdoor cuts, some baseline work there was being done specifically when Lonnie Walker got in this game, but then even just the freedom for Cam Thomas and others to get into the mid-range. The other part about this, so it's twofold. Real quick, is one, on the three of them playing together, the lack of desire to shoot for Ben Simmons is what makes it possible for a massive increase in volume for Cam Thomas. And Mikal Bridges is still averaging 14 shots a game to start this season, right? Down 4, almost 5 from last season. And it's going to change when you get back a Cameron Johnson and other players. But that's where you go, oh, is there enough ball to go around for these two guys? Yes, because there's another player on the court who couldn't care less about putting up shots at any point along the way. The last thing that I want to mention about Mikal here too is it's something that we said in the offseason in camp and just what Mikal's game needs to be. So his field goal percentage, by the way, 52.4% on the start of this season. Again, the amount of times that I thought, oh boy, he just couldn't get that ball to go. Oh, he just didn't quite make it. He's averaging almost 21 points a game. Again, doesn't feel like he's getting over 20 points a game, but he still shows up there at the end of the stat sheet. The other big one for me is the shots at the line are a little bit down from last year when he came over to Brooklyn. The things that are up though, he's averaging almost 6 rebounds per game. That's a rebound and a half more over last season with Brooklyn and an extra assist per game. So the other facets of his game, which again can directly correlate to Ben Simmons being on the floor on the defensive end as well, when Claxton is there too, this team needs to, in order to win the rebound battles, you heard Cameron Johnson talk about this in camp, it has to be everybody or real attention to this. He said, Mikal Bridges, I want to be that more of that guy, and that's bearing out as well. So, you know, in totality, we actually said we don't think Mikal is necessarily going to be a 26, 27-point scorer again this season, but 22 points, a couple more rebounds, a couple more assists, you start to see that balanced picture for him to go along with the defensive acumen that he has. Coming up here in a second, what is it going to look like for rotations now in the absence of some of these key starters? And does Doug agree with me that these new call-ups in Armani Brooks and Jalen Wilson could have roles on Wednesday night? Let's dive into that here in just one moment. All right, wrapping up today's Locked On Nets episode and reminding you that when the Brooklyn Nets take on the Miami Heat at 7 p.m. tonight, you can go ahead and get over and catch every single bounce of the basketball with the hometown broadcast on the SiriusXM app. That's SXM app. Search Nets, and you can go ahead and get all that action over on SiriusXM as well. Rotation-wise, Doug, no Spencer Dinwiddie, no Nicholas Claxton, no Cameron Johnson on Dasher, on Dancer, on Prancer. Name the guy. They're not going to be in the lineup. Who guides the slate tonight is somewhat of what we're leaning towards here. Do you have any concerns that with every game now, like the Hornets, that's a winnable game? I think this is going to be a different type of beast against Miami. And we saw the big minutes against Charlotte. Do you think that the Nets and Jacque Vaughn are still going to be able to look to this bench and say, you guys can get out there and give us some big opportunities here, like Lonnie Walker? Dorian Finney-Smith is now in the starting rotation. Who fills that void as well?
Yeah, look, I mean, even from last game when they played 9 guys, like they're missing 27 minutes off that game.
Yep.
Right. And they were
Yep.
already playing a 9-man rotation, which is like for regular season a little short, right? So now you're missing 20. If we assume Dinwiddie and DSJ are out, which I think they are, that's 27 more minutes that need to open up. That was with Cam Thomas already playing 38. That was with Mikal Bridges already playing 38. There's like not too much higher that any of those guys can go. DFS, he played 31. You're probably going to see him probably climb toward 35, maybe get Simmons toward 36, but it's not like there's so much room for growth on those guys' minutes. Right. And Royce played 32 off the bench and Lonnie Walker played 29 off the bench. So that like at this point, probably with bringing up Armani, with bringing up Jalen, and maybe we see get Trent Wofford in there. Like, I'm probably going to see one of those guys play. It's just they're just
right.
Yeah, one of them. I mean, right, exactly. So I'm not sure who it's going to be. I kind of hope it's Watford because he's been the guy that's kind of there. He seems like the most interchangeable, at least in terms of like probably doesn't do anything great, but that doesn't seem like he does anything poorly either, and like has some length or whatever. I'm hoping that's the guy we see because I'd like to get a nice long look at like if they have anything with him. But yeah, I mean, that's these guys getting called up. They might get called to that. We're already sort of getting close to break glass in case of emergency with some of these dudes. And with Clowney and Clowney and Derek getting optioned to the G League on the 2-way. Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, we're just going to see minutes from one of these guys. I'm not sure who's going to be, but it's for sure they're in that spot already.
Yeah, and I think the last game against the Hornets was a lot easier to not go into Trendon Watford because they started blowing the doors off early, right? So you don't necessarily need to go into these. Now, you can make the case maybe that's when you want to start to sample some of these other players when you feel like a game is well in hand, but being 0-2, feeling like you could have won those first couple of games, let's make sure we check this box. Everyone was firing all cylinders. The Armani Brooks piece to me is we know this guy can knock it down from the outside. He had a great camp, played great down in Vegas. I think you look at him and you say, well, Ben Simmons keeps setting the table for people. Let's just keep flooding them with them. You saw the way Lonnie Walker was able to push the pace a little bit, go at the paint, go at the basket a couple of times as well. Like, I wonder if you're hoping for a little bit of that there too, because unlike what we've seen positive sample sizes, I will say like Royce O'Neal feels a little bit just kind of out of place inside of the new style that the Nets are evolving here. So I'd hate to see more Royce O'Neal. It's not even over knock on him. I just don't think that he should be playing 32, 33 minutes a night in the absence of the other guys, although they probably will. Go ahead. And then I want to touch on Jalen Wilson too.
I mean, I'll push back on that a little bit only because I think like at least with him, he's like sort of, again, he's like, not a guy who probably does anything particularly awesomely, but doesn't do anything poorly. And I think they are at this point with the team, like just guys that aren't going to be negatives in certain areas is a good thing. Right. And that's putting too much. Like O'Neal's been good, I think overall. So I think I know what you're saying. Like it's probably not like a future move, and I think we know exactly what he is at this point. I don't think there's any surprises coming from Royce O'Neal, but I also am sort of happy to have him. Like I actually wonder if he starts. Right. Like, in terms of like, you have to get someone to start for Dinwiddie. We haven't made a prediction. Maybe we'll do that on the pregame preview tomorrow. About like
that's a bonus episode only on the pod, so you got to go over there and make sure you catch that.
But I wonder if like that's where they're going to end up going with him, just because it's like, hey, we know exactly what he does. We can trust him. He knows everything. He's been on the team. He's a veteran. He's not going to make mistakes. I wonder if like that's where they end up going.
There's probably a good case. There's a very strong case, especially with the track record of the coaching staff and keeping these veterans around. That may be the scenario, but. The other part of this is, so the one on Trendon Watford is just, you mentioned it. Fans have been talking a lot about Harry Giles as well. And in the one, big preseason game, there's a sample size there. I just don't get the indication. You saw Day'Ron Sharpe go right back out there for his big minutes, big rebounds, and big fouls. I just don't see them going that way yet. Like to see more Trendon Watford. And then there's the Jalen Wilson piece. Now, listen, could he sit there at the back end of this bench and it's just a matter of getting a taste? Maybe. I actually thought, tell me if you agree with this, that the reason why you just optioned Whitehead and Clowney now, as opposed to starting them down there, is because they were your first round picks. And this is just a part of it. You're on this team. We know that Clowney's going to take a long time to develop. We know Derek Whitehead still has to do something when it comes to the injury and getting himself back and ready to play. Jalen Wilson represents a guy that can actually maybe play minutes for the Nets. Armani Brooks can be that guy. It's why he made the roster ultimately. So bringing those guys up, I would like to think that there's a world where Jalen Wilson can get a little taste here, maybe is spelling a DFS, maybe getting into the rotation along with Royce O'Neal, and however you want to work this, because there's a world where he actually can have a role for this team this season. And you might as well do it now because you have the excuse. Man, all these injuries. That's why we threw him in. If it doesn't look so good, we just wanted to give him a taste. But if it does click, suddenly you have a guy that maybe you can bring along a little bit sooner than you expected. I know that I'm higher on him in this moment than maybe you are.
I'm actually not opposed to any of this because they're just in a situation now where, like, what are you going to do? Split hairs around who should play here? Everyone's hurt.
Right.
Like, everyone's hurt.
You get a run, and you get a run.
Again, we're already talking about a massive amount of projected minutes. Like, we went into the season projecting 30-ish minutes for Spencer Dinwiddie, for Nick Claxton, for Cam Johnson. I think I had it like the beginning of the season, like DSJ had 14. Yep. I mean, that's 104 minutes out of the 240 that are already and that's probably low with some of those guys, right? Like 32, 33 for some of those dudes. So like you're talking about 105, 108 minutes of projected preseason stuff already out the window. So I just don't think beggars can be choosers in who should actually be playing right now. So I'm happy to see anything. I will say with Harry Giles, I mean, death taxes and everyone wanting some center, non-spacing center to go out there and play. So I get why. Like, there's just a certain class of fans out there that just can't even live unless they see some big center ranging around. It's nothing against Harry Giles, but we've just been through this for years and years. So I'm not surprised that people are calling for this, but he's just not interchangeable enough for me. Mm-hmm. Like long term. And so that just doesn't excite me really, even though I think fine, like go out and play, but it's just not, I don't think it's an exciting move. I'd rather know like if a Watford can play with a lot of different combinations, that's more exciting for me. Like Jalen Willis, can he play with a lot of different combinations? That's more exciting for me. That's just me. I get it. If you like the big center to go out there and grab rebounds because it makes you sleep at night, then go for it. It's like tucking yourself in, but that's just not for me.
And by the way, it's like we want Watford because he's been successful. We saw his successful sample size. You can go back and look at his play in Portland as well. And he fits what you've seen this team in particular, the Nets specifically. Like this is the model of player they want. You may not always love that the Nets want to go with small ball lineups and push DFS into the 5. I can appreciate that. Nevertheless, this tracks with what they want to do and ultimately what we would like to see them do as well. Well, and by the way,
I do find it hilarious because these small ball lineups have been awesome.
Like
these small ball lineups
the Nets have out-rebounded opponents in each of their first 3 games this season by 7+ in each game. So that, when you look at the numbers, I get where the history has been for you on this, and maybe you disagree with it, you see them get beat. But here you are now, the early season sample size. Hey, this model of it with this group of players, it is working. So go ahead and push that away, move forward.
Yeah, it's like it's time to get over it because I know what you said. I know what it is. Yeah, where something hurt you in the past, and this is where we are with some of these guys. I get it, but there's no version of this where this it's not small ball. Like they just have big dudes without a traditional center, and the rebounding works. So anyway, okay, we're gonna cover some more of this tomorrow, or if you're listening in the morning on Wednesday, we're gonna do a bonus episode pregame preview that will only be on the podcast. So make sure you head over there. Obviously, we've said this many times, but there's gonna be live stuff on YouTube that's only happening on YouTube after the game as well. So got to be on both feeds, got to be on the podcast, got to be on the YouTube, and also join subtext.com/LockedOnNets. Talk one-on-one with Adam and I all day long about the Brooklyn Nets. Join subtext.com/LockedOnNets.
If you don't make bold moves, the world doesn't move forward. That's Dick Branson.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Richard Branson's big plane. Basketball. Yeah.